All right, so I'm really excited because we are stepping into something that this entire training's been leading up to, which is disciple making. We're going to talk to you in this section about what a disciple is, how you make disciples, and to kind of really get a framework for discipleship, because there's not a one size fits all when it comes to discipleship. In fact, I think that term we talked about earlier when we talked about being in the community is really important. I think when we think about discipleship, think intentionally organic. Think about processes you can do that are intentional in a framework of something that's a very organic process. Everything we've talked about up to this point is leading you to a space where you can actually start making disciples. So then the question becomes, how do you make disciples, and what is a disciple?
Right. Well, we've got some great content on what is a disciple. There's a video that will really bring a framework for making disciples. But I think that a lot of times when it comes to our mission work, we think we need to plant churches in order to make disciples. But, and I love church planting. I'm a church planter. Matt is a church planter. But the thing is, when you look in the Bible, you see that churches are planted, but that's not the command. They're actually a result of something else that Jesus tells us to do. He says, as you're going, as you're living your life, as you're in these relational spaces, make disciples. And the way we make disciples is to baptize them and teach them to obey everything Jesus commanded.
And not necessarily in that order. What you're going to find is it's an organic process. So sometimes somebody's baptized and then they grow in that faith. We'll baptize people when they're infants, right? But other times, and this is really important, sometimes people start to grow in their faith, get baptized, and then continue growing in their faith. And I think that's really important to understand the process. The other thing that's important, and Trey, you highlight this really well, we are not commanded to plant churches. We're not commanded to grow God's church. We are commanded to make disciples. And it's not just your pastor that was commanded to do that. It's not just professional church workers that are commanded to do that. We're all commanded at some level to make disciples. But when we go and make disciples, churches will be planted, churches will grow, the community will be impacted. All this stuff is an outgrowth of us following the command that Jesus gave us, which is a command to make disciples.
Yeah, because if we plant the gospel and make disciples, then we'll see the church emerge in places where we didn't expect it. I mean, that's what Paul did. He went around and he planted gospel seeds and he made disciples. And then we saw the church emerge out of that.
Yeah, and I think too, it's really important because I've heard it said, and I love this saying. Somebody said, if you seek to plant churches, you might make disciples. If you make disciples, you will plant churches. And
that's Mike Breen.
Mike Breen, yeah. I love it. See, yeah. And I think it's really important because at the heart of this training, we truly believe that you are church planters. You may not be a professional ministry person, you may not see yourself as a church planter, but you are a church planter because you are a disciple maker. And so as you're stepping out into these spaces, what you're going to find is as you make disciples where you live, work, learn, and play, you're going to start seeing churches planted out where you live, work, learn, and play. And the really exciting thing when you center things on discipleship is you're going to see the church planted in places you would never expect to see the church, in ways you would never expect to experience the church. But at the heart of it is going to be people who are learning to follow Jesus and people who are being discipled in following Jesus and discipling others to follow Jesus.
Another thing about discipleship is, I think one of the misconceptions that we have is that someone is converted and then they're discipled. But I mean, if we look at how Jesus did it, the disciples that followed him around for 3 years, he had them doing ministry. He was discipling them. He was pouring into them, but they didn't really get it until, maybe in the upper room when Jesus rose, but honestly, it was the second chapter of Acts when they got the Holy Spirit, when you could really say that they were converted, that they believed in Jesus. It was because it was by the power of the Holy Spirit that they could actually have faith in the first place. And so Jesus discipled these guys for 3 years, and they didn't get it until Jesus had ascended into heaven. And honestly, every one of us can trace our faith back to one of those 12 plus Paul.
And I think that's important. When it comes to discipleship, discipleship is not about completely getting it from the get-go. In fact, when you read the Gospel of Mark, what you find is location is important. So in Mark, he really emphasizes where people are standing in relation to Jesus. And it's kind of one of Mark's ways of saying being a disciple is not about having it all figured out. It's about where are you located when it comes to Jesus. Are you putting your life next to Jesus, and are you learning as you go, or are you disconnected, farther away from Jesus? So don't think of discipleship as a checklist of things people need to learn, know how to do, and things like that. Think of discipleship as a process of growing in relationship and growing in our faith with Jesus and how we live that out in the world around us. So we've got some great content here for you. Take time to process this. Feel free to come back to this. And we'll also give you some simple tools for how you can really easily make disciples through micro-discipleship and things like that. But realize those are all just tools. There's different ways to make disciples, but at the heart of disciple making is learning to follow Jesus and teaching other people to do the same.